As part of the China Institute seminar series held by Our Hong Kong Foundation, Mr. He Yafei was invited to speak on China's foreign policy in the new era of globalization. Mr. He is a former Vice Minister of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China. In his talk, Mr. He presents an analysis of China's role as one of the major economic powers in a globalized world, from its evolving relationship with the G20 to its bilateral relations with the United States. He also gives his own take on how traditional Chinese core values have shaped and continue to shape the development of China's foreign policy.
It is an honor and a pleasure to be in Hong Kong again at the invitation of our Hong Kong Foundation to talk about China's foreign policy in changing times. The changing times meaning, what I want for it to mean is we are in the new era of globalization. I will start with analysis of what has happened in globalization and why it has happened. Then move on to present you a panoramic view of China's growing role in international affairs, with particular reference, as an example, as an illustration, reference to China's evolving relationship with G20. Thirdly, I will talk about how China should view and respond to the emerging new era of globalization, the policy options and strategies available to China. And lastly, you may be interested, I will talk about how can we better manage Sino-US relationship with Trump administration, which will be coming into being in 3 more days. First, let us take a look at globalization. We all know globalization is all around us, affects everyone's life, the life of every company and firms, whatever occupation you are in, it affects us. But now globalization is moving in the direction which we have never seen before. Firstly, culminating in the mid-2016 of Brexit, the British referendum to withdraw from EU, and then end of last year in the unexpected outcome of US election. And then if we move our eyes to European continent, we see radicalization of many political parties in Europe, from Hungary, Italy, France, even to Germany. So you see populism rising almost on every continent, causing social division within a country and among countries. To answer the question of why globalization is landing in such a poor situation, we need to be cool-headed and take a realistic and historical perspective to the issues at hand. I remember when commenting on the results of the US election, a famous political scientist in America, Fukuyama, who said that the question is not why it had happened in the United States. The question we should ask is why it has happened now, not earlier. Globalization since the 1970s, 1980s has produced great economic achievements, has accumulated lots of wealth across the globe and benefiting many, many countries, including China, including the region of Hong Kong. Meanwhile, we have to admit globalization has both winners and losers. We do see certain segments of population in advanced nations, advanced countries, who have lost in this process of globalization in the form of shrinking income, shrinking wealth. And if we look at the larger picture, it is the widening gap between rich and poor, the gap between those who have capital and those who provide labor only. And also, this reminds me of a book written by the French economist Piketty in 2015 called 21st Century Capital. What is interesting is that he uses lots of historical data, several decades actually, for advanced countries, showing the widening gap between the earnings of capital and earnings of labor. The gap has been widening in almost each and every country he analyzed. This certainly gave warning to a deepening social division between the elites and the men on the street if this gap remains unbridged. So what he proposed is to levy a global capital tax, levy a tax on capital all over the world, which is not workable. Of course, we all have sovereign states. You really cannot label capital on huge firms. But the political turn to the extreme right we're witnessing from the US to Europe, now this indicates that the social division I mentioned above has provided fertile ground for populism in Western nations, which has begun to change the political ecosystem and the political landscape of those countries. I mentioned the radicalization of political parties. Almost all those political parties have gone to the extreme right to cater to populism, because populism has exerted huge pressure on those parties in order for them to have votes. So we call it, maybe this is a phenomenon of the party of capital. I mean, capital letters, the party of capital. The problem is not, I would say, with globalization, because globalization has benefited almost everyone. Some more, some less, that's a fact. The problem, I think, the issue at hand is most countries, maybe China is the exception, have failed to address properly the social injustice that has caused by globalization, to alleviate the difficult situation where those people, unfortunate people, who have only labor to offer, have found themselves in. That issue is now driving the political change in the United States and elsewhere. This is the first part I'd want to share with you. Second part, let us have a look. I'm coming back to China. Let's review China's role in the global affairs in the world today, with particular reference on its relationship with G20. The reason I'm mentioning G20 is a platform that has a balanced representation between developed countries and developing countries. First, such international organization. I will give you a few signature years in my mind, because I personally participated in these events, 4 signature years in which China or China's involvement in global governance has taken a turn. The first year I would like to mention is 2003, because it was in 2003 when French was the chair of G7 and for the first time invited 5 big developing countries, heads of state, to participate in a consultation with G7. First time, developing countries found themselves face-to-face with developed countries to discuss global governance issues. That was the first time. The big 5 are China, Brazil, India, South Africa, and Mexico, not the BRICS. This arrangement of consultation between developed countries and developing countries marked a historical step for China to be at the center of economic global governance. 2008, we all know that year was an extremely important signature in global governance because we had a financial crisis. When the financial crisis that took place in the heart of capitalism, in the heart of the United States, in the Western world, it surprised everyone. It shook the foundation of global financial system. It almost brought the global economic edifice down. Then major powers, G7 of course, was worried. Developing countries were worried. And they come together to discuss what would be the most suitable platform or mechanism wherein international community can mobilize themselves to tackle the financial crisis. What should be? Which mechanism we can use? And you can guess, of course, France and a few European countries were still suggesting this mechanism started in 2003, later on called 8+5, because supposedly it's G8 plus 5. So it's called, okay, let's have 8+5 again. Or if you want to add a few more developing nations, you can say 8+6. But it was opposed collectively by developing countries. We said no. We said no because we know that it was not the right forum. We were not in an equal position to discuss global economic issues. Then people's attention turned to G20, which was created in 1999, right after the Asian financial crisis. But that mechanism, G20, was created as a ministerial level forum. But the good thing, as I said, the composition is balanced. So the major powers came together saying, look, we can use this mechanism, but we have to upgrade it to the summit level, let heads of state come. President Bush hosted the first summit in mid-November. The major achievement at the first G20 summit in Washington is to mobilize G20 members, which consisting of major economies of the world, 80% of the world total GDP, over 80%, very representative. Almost all major economies are there. They decided to put together physical stimulus packages in all major economies, try to arrest the economic slowdown or economic collapse the world over. And also putting together a list of deliverables of all members try to resist the onslaught of the crisis. And we succeeded. In 2009, at that time, G20 was not a regular mechanism saying annual summit, one summit a year. We were having summits one after another because the financial crisis was upon us. We were breathless. We couldn't stop. So the first one, end of March, early April, was in London. We call it London Summit. The main task for London Summit, for the British to do as chair, was to expand the rescue facility of IMF, International Monetary Fund. we all know central banks are the last bank to lend, the last lender in a country. But internationally, the global financial system is designed in such a way that International Monetary Fund, IMF, is the last lender. When you have a crisis, when you have countries going bankrupt, which was the case in early 2009, you need to have IMF coming quickly, riding on horses to rescue those countries. But suddenly we found that there was not enough funds. They have about $300 billion, not enough to rescue even one country. So the British, in consultation with others, put forward a proposal to add 500 billion more to the rescue fund. And the first country, of course, they think of is China. At that time, not too many countries have money, and those with money was holding very tight to their pockets, holding very tightly, don't want to share them. After extensive consultation within ourselves, we understand this is globalization. We are in a globalized world. We were living in an interdependent world. China really cannot survive alone with other countries collapsing, bringing down the global financial system and economic regime we have. We cannot really prosper in isolation. That is the realization, that is the basis for China's decision to commit no more than 10% of the number British was asking, meaning $50 billion to buy IMF bonds. But of course, that summit was a huge success. And another significant achievement we made was in autumn of that year at Pittsburgh Summit. In that summit, not too many people noticed there was a sentence in the leaders' declaration declaring G20 as the premier forum for international economic cooperation. Premier forum. We all know before that, the premier forum was G7. That was very important, a turning point in the history of G20 and the global governance. Then, of course, we all remember last year, in my hometown, Zhejiang, in Hangzhou, we had the summit of G20, Hangzhou Summit, 29 deliverables. And most important of all is China, after much persuasion and coordination, had put on the top of the agenda of G20 the issue of development. I've talked about China's relationship with G20. This is only an example to illustrate China's relationship with the rest of the world has changed dramatically and historically. President Xi Jinping has described this change in the following terms. He said on several occasions, on different occasions, China has moved to the central stage of global affairs. China has now stood at a new starting point in history. And also concerning China dream, he said, China has never been so close in its history to the realization of China's dream of national rejuvenation. 3 simple sentences to give us a sense of what has changed between China and the rest of the world. Now the third part, China's view of this new era of globalization and China's response, meaning what policy options we have, what strategies, external strategies we should adopt to deal with the emerging new era of globalization that is full of challenges, even full of crises, one crisis after another. I'll mention only a few, some major foreign policies China has been pursuing. or keep pursuing. One is peaceful development, with reference in particular to China Dream. Peaceful development is essential both philosophically and in reality. I have a few ticks. We can find it in the core value of Chinese culture to build a harmonious world, to have peace among nations. If you read the classics, we all know the order of peace is 家, 国, 天下. Family, peace in the family, harmony in the family, and then you move on to country, within the country, and then among countries, 天下, everything under the heaven. Core element is peace as a harmonious relationship. Before I move on to globalism, I give you two perspectives for you to appreciate why China has firmly taken that view. We need to develop peacefully. One is historical, the other is globalization. We all know China has a period of what we call humiliation of 100 years, 百年耻辱, starting from 1840, the first Opium War, to the founding of the new republic in 1949. 109 years, actually, but we call it 100 years, roughly. Within that 100 years, China was never at peace. China was fragmented. China suffered aggression, plunder, all the bad fortunes, bad things happened to China. We were the victim. We were on the receiving end of all the humiliations a nation or a country could suffer. But we got two conclusions from that period of time. One is we need the peace and development. Without peace, there will be no chance for you to grow economically. Without peace, you have nothing. Without economic power, you cannot have peace. You cannot have peace. You will become victimized by foreign aggression, by whatever misfortune that will fall on your head. So peace and development are the two essential elements we need to have if China wants to become a powerful nation, a great nation in the world today. That's why China has been saying peaceful development. We need peace, we need development. Secondly is globalization. Globalization has provided China with a development model, a development path that is peaceful. Because globalization has given you this chance to be part of the world market, part of globalization, and you are integrated into the system we have inherited right after the Second World War. So you do have a way out. You don't have to follow the old model of those major powers preceding China. They have to resort to war, to military coercion, etc., to gain economic benefits, to become major powers. In that sense, I think other nations, other countries need to understand the determination China has to defend its core interest. I mentioned core interest here because core interest in Chinese foreign policy represents sovereignty, national interest, and development achievements. Three things, core interest. Because of which we had suffered in the past, because we will persist in peaceful development, we are all the more determined to defend our sovereignty, to defend our national security, and to defend what we have achieved through economic growth. Never underestimate that determination on part of China, because otherwise any country who underestimates China's determination in that respect will be making a strategic mistake. That is the first I want to spend some time discussing about China's peaceful development policy. The second thing, it's more about world order. We know that after the Second World War, the world order, the global order, was built by victorious nations led by the United States. China was included, but not as a major voice. That system was represented, or it has been represented, by the United Nations, and its core is a system of collective security, with Security Council as the only international organ that can make decisions that will be mandatory or compulsory for every nation to follow under Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter. But on the other hand, the security of the world was also underpinned by a network of bilateral and multilateral military alliances with the United States at the center. So you have seen two things: the UN security system and the US security system based on military alliances. With more globalized we become, more economically interdependent we become, the UN's role is still very strong. It's universally accepted by all countries, by all nations. But this security arrangement based on bilateral military alliances, multilateral military alliances, I would say was outdated. So China was thinking, or started thinking in this new century, what should we do about this global order? We need to maintain the United Nations collective security system. We need to improve upon the global order or the global security system to make it more secure for everyone. We need to have security through cooperation rather than targeting a third party, a third country. Again, we draw our wisdom from Chinese culture, a harmonious relationship among nations. So President Xi and the Chinese leaders presented an idea of globalism in the form of building a global cooperative partnership network, a network of partners. You hear a lot when our leaders are visiting other countries. They signed MOU to establish comprehensive strategic partnership in the new century. By the end of 2016, China has established over 97 partnerships with different countries and regional organizations, approaching 100. Globalism has taken shape. I don't think we're trying to compete with the United States. We're trying to show there is another way, a peaceful way of cooperating and collaborating in the world today to maintain international peace and security as a support to globalization, to economic growth. Thirdly, I'll briefly mention what the current role China enjoys in global governance. China has begun to play a leadership role in globalization by providing Chinese thinking, Chinese ideas, and even concrete China's programs. We all know China used to be quite passive in our participation of global governance. China has joined hundreds of international treaties, and organizations. China has established diplomatic relations with over 170 countries. So China is right in the middle of a full international relation, international partnership. But now China has realized, as a great nation, as a global power, we need to be more proactive. Proactive in the sense that perhaps we should play a leadership role by not forcing our wills on others, but by leading with examples, with our own thinking, with our own ideas. Importance we attach to development is one example. Another example is the Belt and Road Initiative. The Belt and Road Initiative is an innovative idea in global governance. It transcends regional division. It transcends ideological division. It transcends monetary regional divisions. It will link RMB, the region mostly using RMB, with regions mostly using ruble of Russia, and of course US dollars. So it is really an innovative idea to build a community of nations with shared interests and a shared destiny. With that in mind, China has quickened the pace of negotiation on the APEC-wide free trade agreement. We are trying to reinforce the core position of the UN in maintaining global peace and security. We will, working together with Germany, who is the next chair, and Argentina, who will be followed in 2018 as the chair of G20, to implement decisions made at Hangzhou last year. We will also keep the momentum of 2030 UN Sustainable Development Goals. That is a program adopted by the United Nations. More than 189 members have agreed to initiate a program to help developing countries to achieve sustainable development by 2030. And China set an example in Hangzhou last year to have high standard national programs. Not only China, but other G20 members to take the lead. This is the way China should do, I believe, to make globalization work and to make globalization great again. Now, lastly, but not the least, how to manage Sino-US relationship with Trump administration. People are very much worried about the future of China-US relationship. The first point I want to make is that the fundamentals of China-US relationship are basically sound, meaning we are the first and the second largest economies in the world, that if we start a trade war with each other, we will hurt each other. You may hurt yourself more than the other party. We have shared interest in maintaining peace and security, not only in Asia, but in other parts of the world too. We have shared responsibility in tackling global challenges such as climate change, energy safety, etc., etc. Take trade, for example. I talked about trade surplus China enjoys, or trade deficit US suffers in our bilateral trade. There are lots of reasons to this trade deficit on the part of the United States. There are other ways to reduce the surplus if we look at from a positive perspective. For instance, US can lift the ban on two things. One is export their shale gas to China, to establish an extensive energy relationship with China. China needs lots of shale gas, natural gas, of course, partly to eliminate the foggy weather we suffer in Beijing. But that would be a good thing. US become a supplier, one of the suppliers of our energy sources. Secondly, they can lift bans on some of the not so sensitive dual usage items, dual usage commodities to China. They can export these goods to China. Actually, the technologies involved are only a few years ahead. China will catch up very quickly, but there is a huge market in China. If the United States does not seize it now, it will be seized by other countries. So I'm just have a brief look at the trade patterns between two countries. These two things we have, if the United States can agree to do these two things, you can reduce trade surplus on part of China dramatically. Secondly, at the same time, it is very important for the United States, a new administration under Mr. Trump, to understand there are some issues that fall in a domain of China's core interest that it cannot touch seriously. Taiwan is one thing, one China policy, one China principle. That has been a policy commitment, a policy carried out by 8 US administrations since President Nixon visited China in 1972, early February 1972, successively. And Trump administration need to carry that policy forward for the sake of China-US relations, because this is the very basic political foundation upon which our bilateral relationship has rested. If you take that away, the whole thing will go away, will collapse. So this is non-negotiable. At the same time, China needs to talk to the US as early as possible about opportunities of cooperation. Not only bilaterally, as I mentioned, in terms of trade, in terms of maintaining peace and security in South China Sea, in Western Pacific, in terms of creating peace in the Middle East, in terms of fighting terrorism across the globe. These are the things I mentioned in China-US relationship, how to manage this important relationship. A lot of things to do, but in some, we need to work together. A new president may be unpredictable, but the world is not a place that will allow us to make huge mistakes by simply being unpredictable. We need to foresee the future and map a way out for all of us, because we are in this together. We're not alone. Here I want to mention the role of Hong Kong. We are all in Hong Kong. Hong Kong continues to be an international financial center, an international shipping center, and ranks pretty high on the list of global competitiveness, meaning it's very good here to do business. You have rule of law, you have huge pool of talents in whatever field you're looking at, especially in the financial field. So Hong Kong can contribute a lot, not only to a better future for Hong Kong and China as its motherland, but also in terms of China's initiative to promote global cooperation, such as the initiative of One Belt and One Road. Some people say Hong Kong could be a super connector. I agree certainly with that, but you need to define better where you would connect, how you would connect, in what way you would contribute to the realization of that great initiative. To sit down and think about it. And I'm confident because Hong Kong has contributed a lot in the last 3 or 4 decades in China's modernization. Without capital through Hong Kong, the opening up, China's opening up that took place, first started late 1970s, would not be a success. Hong Kong was essential. Hong Kong also contributed a lot to China's diplomacy. So I can foresee the future wherein Hong Kong will keep playing an essential role in China's modernization, in China's expanding role in global governance, as well as China's diplomacy per se. I will end by saying China now is a global power, or with global reaches, global influence. So China has no option but to be in the forefront of globalization and global governance. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you.